Hello, my name is Dawud Ali, and I present a misconception busting curator covering Ghanaian artist Abladde Glover. The African Art course has been pivotal at exploring misconceptions on African art. This includes the belief that African art is only traditional, tribal, anonymous, and disconnected from contemporary matter. This interpretation meant that African art presents traditional culture aspects alone, ignoring the modern forms. The presentation shows that African artists constantly engage with urbanization, globalization, contemporary social realities, and modern artistic innovations. To support this, the presentation focuses three paintings by Glover: Red Market Scene, People in the City, and Fishing Village. Cumulatively, these artworks challenges misconceptions on authenticity, modernity, and African artist identity. The core central message emphasized in the reading states African art is dynamic and evolving, often in this identity African, European, British, Nigerian, Black, modern, primitive to play them off each other and ultimately undermine any notation of a fixed essential identity. The quote is an example of African artist Yinka Shinobar evolved by adopting multiple cultures in their work. This exhibition challenges misconceptions on African artists and art. One misconception covered in the course is the belief that authentic African art must remain unchanged and rooted exclusively in tradition. According to Sidney Littlefield Casfer, African art and authenticity ideas of authenticity are often imposed by outsiders who expect African artists to remain tied to traditional forms rather than being innovative. There is a persistent, if unspoken, assumption that whereas change and innovation are the lifeblood of Western art, and they are the kiss of death for African art. Another misconception is that African art exists outside modernity. Robert Farris Thompson challenges this idea in Afro-modernism, citing that contemporary artistic culture and African culture have been largely encountered. Thompson notes the others, women and men virtually next door, are deeply and creatively embedded in contemporary culture. The third misconception is African artists represent is a single African identity. According to Ugabi's our identity boundaries, contemporary African artists should not be forced to perform a fixed version of Africanness for Western audiences. Such anxiety have less to do with facts of authenticity and the relevance of tradition as with a desire to force African artists behind the confines of manufactured identities aimed to place a distance between their practice and the purloined identity of contemporary Caucasian art. This painting is a depiction of Ghana's urban marketplaces. The first look into the work shows a dense composition of what appears as people in a busy market. The artist utilizes a detailed paintwork approach backed by yellow vibrant colors. I believe that this is important towards allowing people viewing this image to focus on its aesthetics rather than individual figures. This artwork is vital in challenging the assumptions that African art is only concerned with ritualistic objects and village life, often duplicated in other forms of vibrance of an African townscape through the use of bright colors, challenging the Western view that largely assumed poverty and disorder in African cities. States Abram states, Glover's work portrays Africa as a vibrant and changing urban environment and not towns stuck in time. Glover's idea in this work is also reflected by Thompson's discussion of Afro-modernism, citing that African culture production fully participates in modern life and does not exist outside of it. Furthermore, modern culture has always been shaped through interactions between Africa and the global audience. The other is your neighbor that black men and modernist cultures were inseparable long ago. Thompson. In the marketplace scene art, Glover shows the contemporary realities in Ghana, challenging the misconceptions of African art. The red market scene artwork represents the themes discussed in Lecture 11 on what qualifies as an African art. In this lecture, the readings on Yinikab Shinobar are utilized to encourage people seeking to understand art to question who has the authority to question African authenticity. Meanwhile, Nancy Hines in African Arts notes that Shinabar challenged assumptions that African artists must conform to limited cultural expectations. Shinabar says he has sometimes felt pressure to be black in his work, a stereotype blackness based on notation of the primative and the executive that are very similar to, but not exactly the same as notations of Africanness. Hines 65. While Glover utilizes a different approach from that Shinabar, both artists, though, through their work, reject the simplistic definitions of African identity. The painting shows a modern African art can equally portray contemporary city life while remaining connected to the local experiences. The aesthetics of the art show vibrancy associated with West, while the people in the market reflect the art Africa open market traditions, which also shows economic empowerment. The red market scene artwork can also be connected to Ogabi's argument that Africa artists are constantly expected to produce art that confirms outside expectations. The demand is for them to produce a specification to affect anonymity, to conclude the ability to enact within the sides of normality. Ogabi 28. Glover defies these assumptions in the work as he paints the realities that Africa that he observes around him and not the stereotypes about Africa. As the title suggests, the artwork focuses on the movement of people and around an urban environment. In contrast to the traditional portrayal, the use of crowded image composition emphasizes energy, mobility, and modern social interaction MoMA. This artwork challenges the idea that African culture remains static in time by dissipating an evolving urban environment which is shaped by modern realist. This work also presents the challenge that African artists merely imitate the Western artistic approach, while Glover is seen to employ the approaches used in modern expressionist painting. He also adapted distant method, allowing him to specifically communicate his Ghanaian experience. The argument reflects Thompson's argument that culture exchange does not erase identity but transforms outside influence into a new thing. Extremely liberating is their suggestion that you don't have to give up on who you are in the veiled Masochism of the supposedly enlightened Western's wish of surrender of self to other in order to live in harmony with others. You give, you listen, you treat others, not the other, with full respect, but remain others, not the other, with yourself, and get on with it. Thompson 94. The painting can be connected effectively to Agabi's discussion on identity and boundaries. According to Agabi, African artists are often judged differently from Western artists, while Western artists are generally allowed to explore any theme. The choice is not given to African counterparts, as they are often expected to represent Africanism alone. The figure of the individual genius, that element which more than any defines enlightenment or modernity, was read from Europe, while the rest of humanity was identified with a collective anonymous production pattern that inscribes primitives of Ogabi 21. In this work, Glover does not subscribe to the limitation as he avoids explaining Ghana to outsiders and instead paints a picture of experiences in an environment he understood. According to Peterson, Glover demonstrates that authenticity does not require artists to reproduce traditional forms of art. This can also be connected to Casper's discussion questioning why innovation is often celebrated in Western art but viewed suspiciously while practiced by African artists. There is a persistent unspoken assumption that whereas change and innovation are the lifeblood of Western art, they are the kiss of death for Africa. Casper 41. This work exemplifies Glover's perspective that artistic identity can be local and modern simultaneously, as his work shows that authenticity can exist in absence of artistic stagnation. The painting shows a coastal Ghanaian community reflecting Glover's shift from the urban works to fishing traditions and community life. The significance of this art is attributed to the fact that it challenges the belief that Africa is governed by a single culture. The course has been instrumental in showing that Africa is culturally diversified. In this work, Glover is specifically presenting Ghanaian context rather than portraying Africa as a whole. This helps challenge the misconception that Africa is culturally homogeneous. The fishing village artwork also stands out for showing that modern artists can be engaged with their traditions without necessarily being limited by them. Even though Glover referenced fishing as one of the ancient culture practices, his artistic approach is highlighted in this work and is modern. This shows that artists effectively incorporate continuity and innovation, a theme covered in this course. Glover's work highlighted in these artworks present a challenge and other misconceptions that have been discussed in this course. These include African art is only traditional, African art is disconnected from modern life, African art lacks innovation, African artists lack innovation, Africa has a single cultural identity, authentic African art must follow traditional forms. Thompson's Afro-modernism is pivotal at explaining why these assumptions are misinformed. He notes that African culture contributes have long shaped global modernity and not exist outside of it. Black and modernism cultures were inseparable long ago. It means that continuous opening up of the world consistence by Black Africans and Black Americans performing life as art. Thompson 9192. This is also supported by Adu, who notes that African artists actively shape contemporary culture. Al-Ghabi, on the other hand, rejects the attempt to confine African artists with fixed categories of identity, such anxieties have less to do with the fact of authenticity and the relevance of tradition, as with the desire to force African artists behind the confines of manufactured identities aim to place a distance between their practice and the pre-aligned identity of contemporary Caucasian art. Or Globe 27. Glover's artwork provides visual evidence to support both arguments, showing contemporary Ghana as dynamic, diverse, creative, and modern. This is a reminder that African art can not be understood based on stereotypes, but through social complexities that emerge. Question 1. Before seeing Abladde Glover's work, what assumptions did you have about what African art looks like? Question 2. Did these paintings change your understanding of the relationship between African art traditions and modernity? If so, why? Why or why not? Overall, Glover's paintings are a demonstration that African art is contemporary, innovative, and deeply engaged with modern social realities. Through urban markets, crowded city spaces, and fishing community, Glover presents a unique version of Ghana that moves away from simplistic stereotypes. Using ideas from Thompson, Ogabi, Casper, and Lecture 11, we can understand that these artworks are powerful challenges to misconceptions surrounding African art and African artists. This provides an essential reminder that African art is not a static category, as it also exists within a field that is shaped by diverse traits by artists. Furthermore, African art, as seen through Glover's work, responds to the social complexities while uniquely presenting them. Thank you very much for listening.